Yeah, I think it's definitely prominent, in life, you know. But I also think that it's
When she died, the headlines were predictable. Another troubled actress, another overdose, another cautionary tale about what fame can do to a young girl. The story wrote itself before the facts even settled, but the people who knew her best refused to accept that simple version. She had plans. She had just called a friend. She had promised her daughter she'd be at school the next morning. There were groceries in her fridge, laundry half folded, a calendar marked with upcoming appointments. That's not how someone prepares to disappear. Something about the timing felt wrong. The official report would later say it was accidental. A lethal combination of prescriptions, a body overwhelmed, a tragic mistake. But that explanation didn't explain the journal stacked beside her bed. It didn't explain the letters she had written but never mailed, pages filled with unfinished thoughts, apologies, and memories she still couldn't name out loud. And it definitely didn't explain the event from decades earlier, the one she never truly escaped. To the world, she was a former teen star who rose fast and fell faster, a familiar Hollywood arc. But to her family, she was a woman who had been carrying something unbearable since she was barely old enough to drive. And the secret, it didn't begin with drugs. It didn't begin with bad relationships. It didn't even begin with fame. It began the very year she became famous. And that's the part no one was ready to hear. Because if that was true, then everything we thought we knew about her story was wrong. Before the scandal, before the struggle, she was simply the girl everyone noticed. Not because she demanded attention, but because attention found her. Born into a stable middle class family, she wasn't raised in chaos. There were no tabloid parents, no stage mom horror stories. Her childhood was ordinary: school plays, family dinners, summer vacations filled with scraped knees and sunburns. She laughed easily. She memorized lines quickly. She watched classic films not like a fan, but like a student. But from the moment she stepped onto a stage at age 8, something shifted. Teachers said she had presence. Directors said she had instinct. Casting agents said she had it. That unexplainable quality that cameras loved. By 11, she was auditioning professionally. By 13, she was landing roles most adults would kill for. Commercials turned into guest spots. Guest spots turned into recurring roles. And casting directors began remembering her name without checking the file. Then came the film that changed everything. She wasn't the first choice. She wasn't even in the top 5 at first. But during the final screen test, something happened. She didn't perform the scene. She lived it. The room went quiet, and suddenly, she wasn't competing anymore. She was chosen overnight. She went from hopeful young actress to the face of teenage America. Posters on bedroom walls, magazine covers, studio meetings. But fame at 15 doesn't come with instructions. It doesn't teach you how to say no. It doesn't teach you who to trust. And it certainly doesn't warn you what it might cost. The film was supposed to be small, low budget, limited expectations, just another teen romantic drama that would quietly come and go. Even the studio didn't expect much, but when it hit theaters, something unexpected happened. Audiences didn't just watch it, they connected to it. Teenagers saw themselves in her awkward smiles and uncertain confidence. Parents saw innocence. Critics saw authenticity. She wasn't polished. She wasn't over-rehearsed. She felt real. And in an industry full of manufactured perfection that felt revolutionary. Magazines called her the girl next door. Talk shows invited her to sit beside legends twice her age. Producers lined up with scripts, convinced she was the next guaranteed box office name. She was barely 16, and already being told she was the future. Money changed. Opportunities changed. The way people spoke to her changed. But while the world saw a rising star, she was learning something darker. Fame doesn't protect you. Sometimes it exposes you on set. She was surrounded by adults. Directors, executives, older co-stars, publicists who controlled narratives, managers who negotiated contracts. Most were professional, most treated her like talent, but one didn't. And in an environment where power was everything, she had very little. What happened during that year didn't make headlines. It didn't stop the press tours. It didn't interrupt the applause, but it marked her. And long after the premiere lights dimmed, she would still be living in the shadow of that moment. She was 15. He was nearly 30. He wasn't a stranger. That's what made it worse. He had access, authority, influence. He knew the system. He understood how power worked in Hollywood, and she didn't. At first, she didn't even have the language for what happened. She didn't call it assault. She called it confusion. She replayed it in her mind, searching for the moment she could have stopped it, the moment she could have walked away, the moment she could have said no louder. Then she called it her fault, because that felt easier than admitting she had been overpowered. And eventually, she stopped calling it anything at all. She buried it, because if she spoke, she risked everything. Her career, her reputation, her image. She had just become America's sweetheart. The last thing she believed the world would accept was a scandal attached to her name. So she smiled in interviews, she laughed on red carpets, she posed beside co-stars like nothing had shifted inside her. But silence doesn't erase trauma. It buries it. And buried pain doesn't disappear. It grows. Her family noticed the change first. She became guarded, more defensive, less trusting of compliments. That bright, effortless energy people loved, it dimmed. There were moments when she seemed present, and others when she looked miles away, even in crowded rooms. But Hollywood doesn't slow down for pain. The offers kept coming, the cameras kept rolling, and she kept pretending. Because in an industry built on illusion, she had just learned how to create the most convincing one of all. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. In fact, everything looked better than ever. She transitioned from teen roles into more serious dramas with surprising ease. Directors praised her emotional depth, critics called her unexpectedly powerful. Industry insiders said she was evolving. Fans admired her range. She wasn't just a bubbly girl from that one-hit movie anymore. She was layered, complicated, interesting. She even turned down roles she didn't believe in, scripts that felt shallow or exploitative. That's how secure she seemed. That's how confident she appeared. But confidence on camera doesn't guarantee peace off of it. Behind closed doors, sleep became impossible. Nights stretched long and restless. She would lie awake replaying conversations, replaying memories, replaying that year. Anxiety crept in quietly at first, a tightness in her chest, a sudden wave of panic before auditions, an unexplained irritability around people she once trusted. She began self-medicating, first with alcohol, just a drink to relax, just something to take the edge off, then something stronger. At first, it was occasional, then it became routine, then it became necessary, because when she wasn't numb, the memories came back. And they didn't come quietly, they arrived in flashes, in dreams, in sudden moments of fear she couldn't explain to anyone around her. She was praised for her professionalism, but no one saw how much effort it took just to stand under the lights. The career looked perfect, but perfection was becoming harder to perform, and the gap between who she was publicly and who she felt like privately was getting wider. In her early 20s, she married quickly. To outsiders, it felt sudden. Friends said it was rushed. But to her, it felt safe. He wasn't from the industry. He didn't care about premieres or press tours. He spoke about stability, normalcy, building something quiet and steady. He promised protection. He promised she would never have to face Hollywood alone again. He promised he would shield her from everything that had ever hurt her. And after years of feeling exposed, that sounded like salvation, but control often disguises itself as safety. At first, it was small things. He would answer her phone. He would sit in on meetings. He would suggest she slow down her career for her own good. Then the suggestions became expectations. Phone calls were monitored. Auditions were discouraged. Scripts were filtered before they reached her. Independence was labeled dangerous. He said the industry wasn't healthy for her. He said people couldn't be trusted. He said he was protecting her. But slowly, the world around her grew smaller. Different man. Same power imbalance. The control didn't always show itself in obvious ways. Sometimes it was emotional, sometimes verbal, and sometimes it crossed lines she never thought she would tolerate again. When it ended, there were no dramatic headlines. No public scandal. She walked away quietly, with bruises no camera ever saw, and a deeper fear of closeness than she had before, because now, even love didn't feel safe. And once trust fractures twice, it becomes almost impossible to rebuild. When her first child was born, something shifted inside her. Not the kind of shift cameras capture, not the kind that makes headlines, a quieter one. For the first time in years, she felt purpose without performance. There were no scripts to memorize, no critics to impress, no directors to please, just a tiny heartbeat depending on her. She documented everything: birthdays, school plays, soccer games, first words, first steps, first days of school. She filmed more than most parents, took more pictures, saved every drawing, kept every note. It wasn't just love. It was urgency. As if loving harder could fix what had been broken years earlier. She turned down major opportunities just to stay home, roles that could have revived her career, interviews that could have reshaped her public image. To the outside world, she seemed stable. Grounded. Retired by choice. People said motherhood saved her. But trauma doesn't disappear just because life looks peaceful. It waits. It waits for quiet moments, for stress, for exhaustion. And when her mental health diagnosis came in her 30s, it reframed everything. Mood swings weren't personality flaws, they were symptoms. The sudden bursts of energy, the crushing lows, the racing thoughts at 2 a.m. But by then, addiction had already taken hold. What began as coping had become dependency, and motherhood, as powerful as it was, couldn't fully outrun the past she never healed. The first arrest barely made headlines. A small local story, a brief mention. The second did. By the third, the internet had decided who she was. The narrative was easy. Former teen star spirals out of control. Her mugshot went viral. Within hours, it was everywhere. Side-by-side comparisons flooded social media. Then and now, smiling red carpet photos next to hollow eyes and tired skin. People called her unrecognizable. They called her tragic. They called her washed up. They turned her into a warning, but they didn't call her traumatized. They didn't call her untreated. They didn't call her scared. Addiction became the headline. The trauma never did. Strangers analyzed her appearance like it was entertainment. They didn't see the panic attacks. They didn't see the therapy appointments she kept canceling. They didn't see the nights she tried to quit and couldn't. They saw decline. They saw failure. They saw a fall from grace. But what they were really witnessing was someone unraveling under the weight of something that had never been addressed. Every rest chipped away at her credibility. Every viral photo made it harder to be taken seriously. And with every public mistake, she retreated further into private pain. The world thought it was watching a downfall, but in reality, it was watching untreated trauma reach its breaking point. In the final year of her life, something changed. Not dramatically. Not publicly, but internally. She talked quietly about writing a memoir. Not about fame, not about the movies, not about red carpets or box office numbers. About what happened at 15. She wanted to tell the truth. She wanted to explain the years that never made sense. The mood swings, the addiction, the broken relationships. The fear she couldn't name in interviews. But telling that story meant reopening wounds she had spent decades trying to bury. She drafted pages, started chapters, stopped halfway through sentences she just didn't know how to say it without feeling exposed all over again. 2 months after she died, her family spoke publicly. They confirmed what she had carried alone for decades. And suddenly, everything made sense. The drinking, the withdrawal, the self-sabotage, the paranoia, the fear of trust. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't vanity. It wasn't a craving for attention. It was unresolved trauma. And once that truth surfaced, the narrative shifted. She wasn't just a former star who couldn't handle fame. She was a teenager who had been hurt and never given space to heal. But by the time the world understood her pain, she wasn't here to tell it herself. She died in her early 40s. Official cause: accidental overdose. A sterile sentence on a report, but that sentence doesn't capture her story. It doesn't capture the girl who once lit up movie screens. It doesn't capture the mother who never missed a school event. It doesn't capture the woman who tried over and over to rebuild herself quietly. She wasn't just a former teen idol. She was a survivor who never fully healed, a mother who tried to outrun her past by loving harder, a woman who succeeded publicly and suffered privately. Her life forces a harder conversation, not about fame. Not about drugs, but about what happens when trauma goes unheard, when silence feels safer than speaking, when reputation feels more fragile than truth. Because sometimes, the most dangerous wounds are the ones no one sees, the ones that don't leave visible scars, the ones buried beneath smiles and applause. And sometimes, by the time the truth comes out, it's already too late. Her story isn't just about loss. It's about the cost of silence. And maybe the real legacy she leaves behind isn't tragic, but a reminder to listen sooner. To believe sooner. To protect sooner, before another bright light fades quietly in the dark.